we had a man under contract who knows how to build up these energy systems. And we had raised some funds through the Orion Project, which is an informational project, and people had given some funds, and this guy was working on one of these devices based on a lot of the Tesla work that he had done in his classified lab. His immediate intelligence handlers said, you may do this, just don't touch the propulsion systems, the things that make things fly and disappear into transdimensional space, because he's worked on those also. So he received this grant from us, and he was working on it down to his SCIF, which is a secure communication intelligence facility. They're near Huntsville, Alabama, near the Marshall Space Flight Center and the Redstone Arsenal. Comes a former CIA director with a bunch of goons who threatened him. Now, this is in the last 3 years. This is not ancient history. And basically threatened him, his wife, and his career if he doesn't drop us and drop this. And so here was, we try. So when people say, why don't you try just getting some people and putting some seed money out there? And I said, we've tried that. It doesn't work. We've got to do this with something where the whole world's watching, with a group of people in a lab, and the media is watching, and millions of people and eyeballs are on this project. And that's what we hope to do through Sirius. But in that case, and here was my heartbreak, is that this man was threatened. He put his tail between his legs and ran. Now, that I'm telling you right now, and that the only measure of anything that matters on this subject is moral courage. And I'm so sick of hearing the morality of what passes as morality in this country. I could care less about, the stain on Monica Lewinsky's dress. What I'm concerned about, frankly, is the morality of people dropping humanity and the needs of the earth because they are personally threatened or they are personally offered a buyout. And David, that's what's happened for 100 years. We have got to figure out a way to rise to a higher state of consciousness of no fear, and the fearlessness comes from a spiritual state. As Krishna said to Arjuna on the battlefield, a little of this, with a capital T, eliminates all fear. And it's that state of divine consciousness. And that's what we have to kind of move and operate through to withstand the sort of threats and inducements and temptations that the intelligence community and the corporate world and secret government programs are extremely good at doing. But unfortunately, when you have a lot of these people working by themselves, and it's an engineer somewhere or a physicist somewhere, they get terrified and they run. And I think that this has been the most difficult thing we've ever tried to do. Disclosure Project was difficult. Doing the work we do with contact with the ETs, that's a joy, although we've had a lot of interference. But bringing out these technologies, David, because you're making a run, as you know, at the petrodollar banking macroeconomic power system. And that's really what's running the planet. It isn't 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I've got news for folks. Not the White House and the Congress. That's sort of a sideshow. It's these large cartels and economic interests, and no less a person confirmed this to me than the Minister of Defense of Canada, the Honorable Paul Hellyer, and I was at his home a few years ago before we did a press conference together, and he went into great detail about how the gangbanksters and the sort of the cartels in the banking and central bank system had a grip on global power, and that the governments of the world pretty much danced to their tunes like a puppet.
More and more people are becoming aware of that now, and we are moving into an era in which, and this is a very important point for everybody to be aware of, the Big Brother thing is a myth. Granted, yes, the insiders that you mentioned have been threatened, but there are so many paranoid, fear-porn junkies on the Internet who think that if they even type in a Google search that they're going to get a knock on the door in the morning. Not true.
Well, I tell people, no, it's not true. I think it's only when you're getting close to really making a big change. And I always tell people, if this little birdie is still singing at the mine, I'm the canary in the mine shaft, and if I'm still alive, don't worry about it. But I think that the other point is that we do have good people helping protect us, but also We have a lot of people praying for our protection, which I welcome from the World Puja crowd because they're very conscious people, and I believe in the power of meditation and prayer. But I think on top of it, you have a lot of folks, and this is something I don't talk about that often, but there are a lot of folks in the covert world who want to see this happen, but they're afraid of sticking their necks out too far. They'll end up like Bill Colby, who was killed trying to help us, as you know.
Yeah.
Now, for people who don't know the story, there was a CIA director, Bill Colby, who back some years ago, right before he died, was going to meet with a member of my board of directors and hand off one of these free energy, for lack of a better word, energy generation devices and some seed funding so we could quickly get it out to the world. This is, I think, in the mid-'90s. And the week he was going to meet with us, he was found floating down the Potomac River. It was quite obvious. Even his wife went on CNN and said, look, we don't know why he would have gone out on the river, allegedly canoeing in a rain-swollen, flooded river, leave the house open, the coffee maker on, the computer on. It's very, very suspicious, and yet it never really got investigated. Recently, his son wrote a book thinking that maybe he'd gone and committed suicide, but it was none of the above. A colonel who was best friends with CIA Director Bill Colby told us personally that he was in fact killed because he was going off the reservation and leaving the so-called majestic cabal behind to help do this. And so that became a shot across the bow during, of course, the Clinton administration that frightened off a lot of folks. But
that son of his wrote that book, which also is a documentary, and I don't remember the title of it, but you can look it up on iTunes and watch it. It's really pretty darn good, and it gives you a lot of backstory that establishes Colby. Colby was, just for people who don't know, I didn't know this till I watched the documentary, he was essentially the main fall guy who took the secrets of the CIA and exposed them post-Watergate, post-Vietnam, and basically was the guy who had to, apologize to the world and insisted that this was the only way we were going to move forward was to tell the truth.
Right.
And that's the most poignant part of the documentary, because you're seeing how this one man essentially embodied the secrecy of America and said, now is the time to tell the truth. And there's a strong leitmotif in the movie, subconsciously I felt it, that he was ready to do that cycle again on a much bigger level with you.
That's what he was doing. And
the filmmaker didn't do that in the film, but that's what I saw as soon as I watched it.
Well, the filmmaker and the son and the family don't know what I'm talking about right now in this interview. And what I'm telling you is that, after my assistant, Sherry Adamak, died mysteriously, and there were 3 of us that got aggressive metastatic cancers the same month. And everyone died, but me. I was the only one that lived. I was supposed to die first, as you know.
Did you do hardcore juicing and a nutritional intervention? All that
I did everything: prayer, meditation, conventional medical, and everything you can think of. And so here I am. I'm still alive and free of it, as far as anyone can tell. However, when the CIA director wanted to do this, his best friend, who was a colonel, a retired colonel, told us that, at this point, this was 20 years after he had done all this stuff with the CIA secrets and stuff after Watergate and what have you, and Vietnam, and he felt it was just a crime that all of this UFO information and these sciences and technologies were being withheld from the planet, because he saw how much poverty and suffering and environmental degradation, and that it was all easily fixable. And he knew it. And so he was getting up in years. He certainly knew. I mean, the colonel who came to Sherry Adamak's, my assistant who died, at her wake. I was there by her bedside when she passed away, and then we had a funeral and a wake, and this mysterious man shows up, and he was ushered in by someone that I know, I'm not going to name, who's worked with me for 20-some years, and it was this colonel who had been best friends with Colby, who had died not long before this had happened to us, and he said, look, the colonel said, we both have had terrible losses, but we can't look back. We just have to keep going forward. Wow. Now, I have to admit, I was very depressed for a couple of years, and it was very difficult. So, this has not been a cakewalk by any means. I don't mean to make people think it has been. But ultimately, you keep returning to your spiritual roots and the consciousness and the vision of, what kind of world could we have if the truth were known, if these science and technologies, if these patents were released, if it was known that we're all children of this fabulous conscious universe and that we have brother and sister planets out there that are populated with higher intelligent life forms. I mean, it is such a huge change in our society. And, of course, it's such a large change that it threatens the power structure, both religious and economic and technological and political and geopolitical.
Just to show you how widespread this stuff is, I had a housemate who I used to live with in the house before I now rent it myself, but he had a friend of the family. His family, I won't say what it was, but he was part of a major technology company in the 80s that made a lot of money.
Right.
His father was like the VP of something or other in the company. And they knew this guy who had a defense job. And he just told me this one day because he wasn't even really into UFOs, and I started telling him this stuff, and he wanted to change the subject really quickly.
Right.
Because that's what most people do. They get really uncomfortable. But before he changed the subject, he said that they knew this guy from the defense industries, and on his deathbed, the last thing he said was, if you really want to know something interesting, I can tell you this with absolute confidence. Every form of technology you have ever seen in a science fiction movie, we already have it, and we're already using it.
Correct.
And this is just a guy who didn't even believe most of the stuff I told him, and this was just some little story from his own private file.
Right.
And I've never even told that story publicly before, but the point is there's lots and lots of little bits and pieces of information out there. And what guys like you and me have been doing independently and sometimes collaboratively is pulling it all together and showing people, hey, look, you start connecting the dots, and yes, you're going to see that there's a cabal. You're going to see that there's a secrecy. You're going to see that the world that the media is presenting to you is not the world. We live in Star Trek. We're already a Star Trek planet. We just haven't been told that yet.
Well, you know, it's interesting because one of the things that a Lockheed Skunk Works man said to our team once was, anything you can imagine, they've already done at the Lockheed Skunk Works. So, and those of you who don't know, the Skunk Works are the super secret compartmented operations that Lockheed has, and one of the compartmented operations has dealt with ET technologies and also anti-gravity, so-called gravity control technologies up there near Palmdale and Lancaster and the Edwards complex facilities, and also the ones out in other regions out in Utah and Nevada. But the point is that, you know, it goes way beyond. And one of the things that several of these military witnesses have told me have said that if you told people the truth, it would discredit you because the truth is more bizarre than any of the science fiction that's out there. And it really hides itself. They said it really is a self-concealing thing because we're more than 50 years into the public being miseducated and brainwashed about science, technology, religion, consciousness, education, you name it. And what's happened is that the truth is much more bizarre than any fiction, and therefore it is self-discrediting according to the metric of the mainstream media and mainstream academia. So it's really through the looking glass, and this is, you know, what you said a little while ago is so true, that it's really a paradigm shift of reordering one's entire worldview.
Well, think about the fact that when you go to school and you get a grade on a paper, you're basically told that the accuracy of your knowledge determines your value as a person.
Right.
If you don't have accurate knowledge in your mind, then you get an F grade, which means that you are a failure.
Right.
And then people have been conditioned through psyops that if they believe things that are not true, they will suffer social ostracism from their peers. And we have a strong connection to the animal kingdom in which if you break off from the group, you're probably not going to live very long.
Correct.
You need to conform in order to survive. And
You're
so we have that
right.
We have that deep animal conditioning that says that if we possess incorrect knowledge, that we're a failure and that we're therefore at risk.
Right.
And that also goes over into the employment world. You know, as soon as you get out of the conditioning of school, you graduate directly into employment in which you're on a job site, and you have to make sure that your knowledge is correct and that you conform to what the management wants you to do.
Right.
And more people now, thanks to the Internet, are able to work for themselves and break out of that endless chain of backstabbing and butt kissing.
Right. Right. Well, this is actually, one of our